Okay, well, welcome everyone to the first Leading with Impact webinar. Today we're talking about presence and the power of presence in leadership. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land that I'm meeting on today. That's the Port Mariner people of the Paradigmi Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also to elders past and present on the lands that you're joining from today. So in this webinar, we're looking at how to strengthen relationships and build trust, create empowered team members who are not dependent on us, remove management bottlenecks, reduce the chance of burnout, and reduce the risk of psychosocial harm. And we're going to look at how we can do that by being fully present with the other person, being curious about what they think and feel. And we'll talk about how we do that by really listening to what people are saying, and then empowering their thinking and choices by asking the right questions. One more thing to add, I suppose, is that in the age of AI anxiety that we are all living in at the moment, we're also talking about strengthening what AI can't yet come close to doing, and that's being human and being in relationship. I was at a leadership symposium a couple of weeks ago where we were talking about the possible future with AI and the likelihood that AI will take over most of the productive tasks that we do as leaders. And if we're not doing that productive labor, then what are we doing? And the term that was sort of bandied about was connective labor. That's building trust, fostering belonging, and holding space for difficult conversations and creating meaning. Essentially, looking at a future where leadership is about being human.
Excellent. And focusing on people, which would be nice, and leads to great work and great outcomes and happy clients and customers as well. When we run workshops, for every sort of workshop I've run for the last 6 years, we've started with the first question, think about the best manager you've ever had. What is it that made them the best manager you ever had? And we get some really common responses when we ask that question. We often hear things about authenticity, about approachability. We definitely hear things about leaders who show genuine interest in the people that they're managing and who listen to the people they're managing. And then we also hear things like they think about development or career opportunities, they think about advocating for the teams they're managing, and that there is trust both ways between the leader and the team. Now, the development opportunities and the advocacy and the trust are probably things that are made possible by being approachable and listening and showing genuine interest. I saw something only a couple of days ago. There was an article about psychosocial safety, or psychological safety rather, that Amy Edmondson was commenting on, saying psychological safety doesn't arrive in a single moment. It is built on daily deposits of curiosity, candor, vulnerability, and listening. And I thought that's really just a lovely statement to bring together some of what we're going to think about and talk about today. Let's start with being present. The foundational element of being an effective leader and of having a coaching mindset is about turning up. It's about being present. It's probably helpful for us to think about what that means, both practically and mentally. So we'll start with the practical. When we talk to leaders, we really prioritise employees having access to them and them having access to employees that is really consistent and regular. So what that can look like is creating and maintaining one-on-one meetings, not cancelling one-on-one meetings, through that sort of formal access, one-on-ones and team meetings. They're the priority. The nice to have on top of those formal one-on-one and team meetings is informal or ad hoc access. So that might look like having office hours, that might look like walking the floor. Now, it's really worthwhile acknowledging that as people leaders, you're probably very busy in your roles. You might have operational responsibilities. You might be moving from one meeting to another. Managing people is probably not the only thing that you're doing in your roles. And and that going from one meeting to another, or operational concerns or strategic concerns, can create noise or distraction when we're with people in those team meetings and those one-on-one meetings. So it's helpful, I think, to think about when you do have those meetings, how are you showing up, which leads us into the next part of being present and what that involves.
Yeah, so it's a good question, isn't it? How do you show up? Once you've got the person in the room with you, and you've got your regular one-on-one established, how do you make sure that you're actually there physically and mentally with them? So I think that for me, there are three sort of things that we need to consider when we think about being present and showing up. One is sort of thinking about how do we transition from one event or one piece of work to the next, whether that's, walking the corridor from one meeting to the next meeting, whether it's, clicking leave and clicking join when we're sitting in front of our screens, or whether it's moving from deep work, where we've been really focused on a task, and then we've got to sort of re-emerge from that to someone sitting in front of us and dealing with their issues. So I think there's three things to do. First thing is to sort of pause and reflect, and just take 30 seconds to sort of consider, what's just happened? What do I need to remember? What do I need to tie up? And just mentally sort of round out what that experience has been. Second part is to sort of recenter yourself, so to refresh yourself. And you can do that by taking a couple of deep breaths, maybe stretching, maybe moving around if you've been seated for a while. Something physical just to re-energize the body. And then the third part is to reset. And this is about where we think ahead into what's coming next. And we think about our intention for that meeting. Who are we meeting with? What assumptions do I have about them? What do I think the purpose is? What mindset do I need to adopt that is going to help me get the best outcome that I can from that meeting? So three things: reflect, refresh, reset. It only takes a couple of minutes between meetings, but it can make a big difference. Second thing is minimizing distractions. We live in the age of distraction. Everything is calling for our attention all the time. These sound like such basic things, but I would say, put your phone away during the meeting, turn off notifications on your computer. If you're lucky enough to have one, close the door on your office so that people don't walk past, walk in, or wave, or just stop by for that "can I just ask you" moment. Just being physically not disturbed is such a big deal.
There's something for me in those first two, in the reflect, refresh, reset, and in the minimizing distraction, that I think are probably good for both parties. Like if you're having a one-on-one meeting, to set that up, because it's possible that some of you are in cultures where everybody has their phones, or where doors are open, or people interrupt each other. So if that's the culture that you're in and you start trying something new, it might be helpful to think about some transparency in that. I've gone and had a webinar, we're thinking about this, I'm going to try this different thing. How do you feel about that? How do we feel about shifting the culture and actively trying to minimize those distractions so that time that you have together is protected for everybody, and so that it can feel a little bit less jarring if it is new.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess the third part, and again, this is probably something equally that you can talk openly about, is about just being aware of how we're reacting during these meetings. So what thoughts do we have going through our mind? Are we just noticing that the person's had their haircut? Are we noticing that you're feeling a bit hungry? Are we noticing that the weather's changed? That's distracting. What feelings do we have? Are we noticing in ourselves, that we're starting to get a bit frustrated? Are we bored? Are we getting angry? And physically, how are we responding? Do we notice maybe that our jaw is getting a bit tight? Are our shoulders tightening? Are we slumping in our chair? All of these things can get in the way of us paying attention to what the person has to say and be present with them. So if we notice those things, not to react to them, but basically just to sort of let them go. So maybe take a breath, have a sip of water, even just naming it in your own mind. You know, I'm noticing bored by this conversation. Time to sort of tune in again.
Surely not.
Surely not. No.
Interestingly, I think there's going to be people who are listening to this thinking, we don't necessarily get on very well. We don't necessarily have great rapport or trust or positive relationships with everybody we work with, as an example. So even I might imagine that when you're doing that, thinking about the meeting and having that intention, that you might be able to anticipate some of those negative feelings as well. If you think this person has a history of doing things that potentially I find irritating, or you don't have the best relationship, you might be able to anticipate some of that. And I think that insight and that preparing for that can help you respond at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And definitely sort of thinking about how you can sort of have some prompts. You know, if you know that you need to sort of physically shift in your chair, you know, then maybe just have a little note to yourself saying, you know, move, have a glass of water there. You know, I had a post-it note on my monitor to remind me to be curious, not furious. So when I felt myself getting a little bit angry about things, I just switched on my curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So that's kind of showing up and being present. And I guess, you know, why is it important for us to be present? I think by being present, it's a prerequisite really for us being able to listen to people. Um, and so if we think about listening, to me, when I think about listening, I think of it as a bit of a ladder that we travel up and down all the time. Sometimes we're listening at a pretty superficial level, other times at a much deeper level. And if we just sort of think about the different rungs on that ladder, sort of the first rung for me is about sort of listening really more to our inner dialogue. So, you know, someone comes in, they sit opposite us, and they tell us that, you know, things are not on track. And maybe the first thing that goes through our mind is, you know, well, I know what this is about. You know, that's another thing that I'm going to have to deal with. Or maybe even, you know, well, I don't know how we're going to fix this. But of course, as soon as we switch into listening to that, we're listening to ourselves. We're not really listening to the other person at all. So just noticing that, it's perfectly normal. Acknowledging it, but then tuning back into the other person.
Yeah, that's human to have that first thought. We're all thinking about ourselves all of the time, where it should be our first priority, but to have that first thought is human. But that, I guess it's important to have that follow-up thought. What else might be happening? What might be happening for this person, or in that sort of next stage?
That's right. I guess the second rundown is what I sort of think about, where we're listening and we're in those conversations which maybe feel more transactional, and we're really listening just to the facts of things. So, you know, they're the conversations where we're always chasing the what, the where, the when, the who, the how. And maybe as well as leaders, you know, we've got the answer in our head already, and we're ready to jump in and share that answer with people and give them the solution. Again, perfectly normal, but I would say that, you know, chasing facts doesn't build connection and trust.
It's really ties back to a couple of those things that we talked about early on in terms of good leadership, is that there can be a temptation to jump to a solution, particularly if we know the answer. That I think sometimes when we talk to leaders, their experience is that feels efficient. I can solve this problem to move on to the next problem. But when we do that, there's probably a little bit of a risk of missing out on a diversity of opinion for a start, but also missing out on the opportunity for development in thinking about, what does this other person know? What can they contribute? How might that be different? How might that challenge the status quo? That might lead to something that is better. So it might take a little bit longer in that short term, but in the long term, if you're equipping people with that skill, that seems like it creates efficiencies in the future.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, if we get down to that third rung, this is where we start to tune in to the whole person. So as you say, not jumping straight to the answer and the facts, but this time sort of really sitting with the person, tuning into them, listening to and being interested in what they're saying to us,
Mm.
maybe listening as well for what they're not saying,
Mhm.
um, paying attention to their energy. How are they showing up in that meeting? What can you tell from their posture? Are they leaning in? Are they slumping back? What emotions are you sort of sensing as they're talking? And I think, when you, as you say, Shannon, when you tune in like that to someone, you're actually building much greater connection. You're building much greater trust.
Mm.
The person is really feeling seen and heard and valued. Uh,
Mm.
and that is going to pay dividends in terms of how you work together going down the track.
Yeah, just avoids that transactional nature of work that could be done by robots. So
That's right.
the other thing for me in this that's connected, I guess, is probably that a little bit connected to what you've just said about the sort of energy of somebody is thinking about the energy in the room, or sometimes what people will refer to as the mood on site, where you're thinking a little bit beyond those steps on the ladder, and there's a vibe, or we would have all had that experience of being, say, in a meeting or a team meeting, and there's what's being said, and what's being said doesn't necessarily feel like what's being felt. And so people might be sort of saying or doing the right thing or following the script that's expected, but the energy might be a bit off. Might seem
Mm.
like people are a little bit cranky, or it might feel like there's things that are being unsaid. So I'm curious about that, as well as those other sort of rungs of the ladder.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there is always that sort of yet deeper level of awareness and listening, if you like, to, yes, that sort of global energy that's sort of floating around in the
Mm.
workplace. Um, and I think, as an individual, how is that useful to you? I guess it's where we start to tap into our intuition a bit more,
Mm.
our sense of what's going on. And again,
Mm.
just noticing it and just being curious about it and thinking about, well, how does this add up to, giving me a more complete picture of what's happening?
Mm. It could be tempting as well, I think, with all of these things to then jump to assumptions about what these things mean. They're not
Mm.
probably, I guess, intended to be distractions. They're just things that we can notice. It's probably helpful also to highlight for people if that feels like a big ask. We're asking you to think about yourselves and the facts and the whole person and the mood on site, that actually you don't need to be doing all of those things. Like you're saying, John, like you can move up and down those rungs. That's natural, that's normal. That maybe really, if we can think about the self and the facts and get those right, that those will actually underpin some of that whole person stuff. That sets us up for success in noticing what's happening with somebody else. So if you're sort of starting to think about this or try it, thinking just about those first two rungs might be a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. If you can notice that you're listening more to yourself, or that you're really focusing just on the facts, then
Yeah,
just noticing that to start off with is going to create a
yeah,
bit of a shift in how
yeah,
you relate to the other person.
yeah. The insight alone, I think, is helpful more than people might understand or might initially think.
Yeah.
So we've thought about being present and what that looks like. We've thought about listening. It's probably helpful to then think about the next step in asking questions. Now, the first couple of things around being present and listening will probably naturally lead to a curiosity and questions when we're really engaged with somebody, when we're focused on somebody, when we're with them. Questions will probably be born out of that. There's a couple of things that I probably think are helpful to think about when we ask leaders what their fears are in managing people, in having difficult conversations. They commonly talk about feeling like they have to have the right answers or to
Mm.
say the right thing. They don't want to sort of take a step wrong in terms of saying the wrong thing. But conversely, when we ask employees what good leadership looks like, they say authenticity and role modeling and not knowing and having opportunities for development. So I think it's an interesting challenge to leaders to think about that. And so we've talked about being present and listening. And so if we think about questions and we think about those two different perspectives, I wonder if that modern leadership, that contemporary leadership, is actually more about asking the right questions than having the right answers, because potentially that's going to be empowering for the people that we're managing, and reduce that sort of that bottleneck that you were talking about, that being curious, that not knowing, that there is a bit of a power in that.
Absolutely. I think, if we think about curiosity and, where does the power lie when we think about curiosity? I think if we contrast, when we, just to go back to what we talked about at the start, when our tendency is to tell people the answer or to give them the solution, really what we're doing by doing that is we're shutting down thinking, we're imposing our view on people. We're losing the opportunity to really see and hear where they're at and how they think and why they think in that way. And I think critically, we're fostering dependency on ourselves as leaders. And when we do that, inevitably we create bottlenecks.
And there's going to be times, aren't there, when leaders have to, you're paid to have authority. That's part of the role, is that sometimes actually you need to make the decision. Sometimes you need to be the last word. Yep. So that's the realities. It's not about pretending that's not the case, but it's more, I guess, around looking for opportunities to empower people in having those conversations and thinking, where can I include people in thinking about how we design and manage work?
Yeah. And I guess, you're absolutely right. There are times when we just have to listen for the facts. There are times when we have to tell people what to do. I guess the shift that we may be talking about here is making that not the default way of being, thinking of it as something that serves us well in some situations, but in other situations we can be doing something different.
Yeah.
So I think, when we think about asking rather than telling, and going into that sort of curiosity space, then, what unfolds for us then? I think, we start to understand and know where people are and where the gaps are. And as soon as we uncover those, then suddenly the opportunity for development opens up. We're creating a safer environment where people feel they can take risks. We're encouraging creativity and diversity of thought. And I think critically, we're showing that we don't own the answers. And as soon as we show that we don't own the answers, we create space for other people to own the answers. And that's building independence and autonomy in our teams.
Yeah. I wonder about if we're thinking about curiosity. There are some people who are so naturally curious in life that when there's going to be people who are less naturally curious, and that's fine. There's no judgment in either. But for those who are less naturally curious, this might, again, feel like a bit of a big ask. So I'm wondering if you've got ideas around how you communicate curiosity to people, how you can build that in.
Yeah, really, I think you're absolutely right. Some people can't stop themselves from asking questions. Some people really are not interested in what other people think. It really does come down to something as simple as the type of questions that you ask. The way you ask the question is going to determine the quality of the information that you get. Seems pretty obvious. I think one of the biggest, but also simplest things to think about is asking open questions rather than closed questions. So just to be clear about what I'm saying there, when we ask a closed question, the answer is always yes or no. So, did you do this? Can you do that? Is it this? Was it that? The answer is always going to be yes or no. So for example, is the project on track? Yes. Okay, tick. No.
No.
Okay, I already start to feel a reaction in myself, a bit of judgment coming up, and it's getting in the way of my listening. Um, so we're getting limited information when we ask closed questions. When we ask open questions, we're seeking more information. So open questions typically begin with what, when, where, who, how. So if we go back to our example, is the project on track? If I was to ask you that as an open question, I could ask you, where's the project up to? Suddenly the answers that I'm going to get are going to be much more comprehensive, and give me the opportunity, by listening sort of closely, to really dig into how you feel the project's going as well.
Yeah, there's something, it does feel, even in, I mean, I'm not working on a project, but immediately when you ask the question that way, it feels broader. It feels like I'm going to be in a less defensive position. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, well, the defensiveness idea is an important one. You'll notice when I said questions, typically start with what, when, who, how, where. One word I didn't use was why. I typically avoid questions beginning with why, because they make people feel defensive and they step into that space of justifying things. And typically the information we get is lower quality because of that.
Yeah.
If I give you a couple of examples, so why did you choose to do that versus what decisions did you make that led you to that choice? Or, why is the project running behind schedule? That project's never on schedule. Why is it running behind schedule? Versus, what's contributing to project delays?
There's something in the why that feels like it's not really sharing responsibility and accountability for things. If it's why, yeah, I feel like I immediately want to start protecting myself and justifying my position. So that might also be really distracting. There might be excellent reasons why the project is not running on time. But if I'm worried about justifying where it's at, then that's probably not really feeling like it's going to get us to a useful place.
I think that's true. And I think, when we think about why, it really goes to the heart of us individually. I think it's why we step into that justifying position. Whereas when we ask those other questions, we're starting to look at things as a system and sort of talking about the various factors that are at play. We may be a key factor, but it gives us an opportunity to talk about the other things as
But
well.
it might be broader. So what,
Yeah.
when, where, who,
And how.
and how. Let's not forget how.
So that's kind of wrapping up where we've talked through, we've talked about being present, we've talked about listening, we've talked about asking questions, what to do with those things. An invitation really to everybody to think about how they might integrate those into their leadership, and to do that maybe by just raising your awareness of where you're at and experimenting. We're going to include an awareness raising exercise in the resources that we're going to send out after the webinar, but to just briefly overview it, it would involve picking an area you might choose, asking open questions, choose a series of meetings where you're going to focus on that with people, observe yourself, reflect after the meetings. How did you go? What did you notice? You might ask other people to be involved and to give you feedback. And then, when you get to the end of the series of meetings, have a little bit of a look at where you've got to, what's changed for you. Do you want to keep working on that? Are you ready to sort of pick up a different area and see how you can do that? It's not going to go seamlessly. We all try things, we learn slowly and painfully. Be kind to yourselves as you're doing it.
It almost brings us full circle, though, to the beginning as well, with the role modeling vulnerability, role modeling authenticity, being open. role modeling, even development for people, that if you need to be generous and kind to yourself when you're trying new things, but also if you can be transparent with people and say, hey, I'm going to try this new thing. I'm open to feedback. It might be a bit clunky. It might be a little bit awkward. We're asking you to be authentic. So this doesn't have to feel polished. It doesn't have to feel perfect. And if it's clunky and it's awkward, that's fine, because it's well intended and it's trying to get you to a good place in terms of your leadership. So in terms of wrapping up, absolutely giving yourself a challenge in some of the information that we're going to send out following the workshop, giving this a try, talking to your teams about the fact that you're going to give it a try. But to recap what we've talked about in terms of being present as a leader, we've talked about being present both physically and mentally. We've talked about listening deeply. So that's done in a couple of ways, by limiting internal noise and internal distraction and dialogue, and also where we can, minimizing external distractions. And also then what we do with that time in terms of asking questions, in terms of being curious, in terms of being open, in terms of exploring what's happening for people rather than jumping to solutions. Now, there's a bunch of different benefits to that we've highlighted. We have stronger relationships and a deeper understanding of people that we're managing, which we know from asking they appreciate. That also, I think, gives us insight into what's happening for both people and within the environment. And when we have insight into people in the environment, it means that we're able to take action if action needs to be taken. So if somebody needs some support, if somebody needs some development, if you need to have a difficult conversation with somebody, it sets you up well for that. If we need to think about the environment and the design and management of work, or things like psychosocial risk, things that need to change there, then it also sets us up really well for seeing those things and being able to act early on those as well. So thank you, everybody, for your time today. Hopefully this has been helpful. We'll send out the resource, as we mentioned, in the next couple of days. And feel free to reach out and have a chat to us if you've got any questions or would like to talk about anything further. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.